So this lesson covers converting decimals to fractions. But before we start that, I want to talk a little bit about rational numbers, which is what this whole unit is over. So when you're talking about rational numbers, the rational numbers is a set of numbers that you kind of already know a little bit about. So when you were really small and you learned how to start counting, those were the counting numbers. And you called those 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And then you learned about a new number called 0, and then we started calling those whole numbers. Last year, and at the beginning of this year, we talked about positive and negative numbers. When you added the negative numbers in there, then those became integers. And so now we're moving on to what we call rational numbers. And this includes fractions, negative fractions, decimals that terminate, and we'll talk about what that means in a minute, negative decimals, and also your repeating decimals. So when I say terminating decimals, I mean a decimal that ends. So those digits stop. For example, 0.5, that ends. Repeating decimals are decimals that have a pattern in the digits that repeats forever. For example, 1/3 is the same as 0, and we're going to write it like this, 0.3 repeating, and that 3 goes on forever and ever and ever. That's a repeating decimal. Because repeating decimals can be written as a fraction, and because terminating decimals can be written as a fraction, that's why they're included in the rational numbers. There is another set of numbers that we'll deal with a little bit later on this year called the irrational numbers. And those are numbers that do not end and that do not repeat. For example, pi, and there's also some square roots that do not repeat as well. So again, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but right now we're going to be dealing with these rational numbers. Together, these two sets, sorry, my circle's not very good, make up what we call the real numbers. So now that we've talked about a little bit of vocabulary, we're going to convert a terminating decimal into a fraction. So these steps are a little confusing. They are written on your notes so you can look over them, but I'm just going to start with working an example. So we're going to express 0.75 as a fraction. And hopefully you already know what this one is because it is a benchmark fraction. But we'll talk about the steps anyways. The first step is to put that decimal over 1. Congratulations, it's now a fraction. However, we're not supposed to have decimals in a fraction form, so we need to get rid of them. If you remember your powers of 10, to move a decimal over twice, that's the same thing as multiplying by 100. But if I do it on the bottom, I also have to do it on the top to keep things consistent. So this is really 75 over 100, which really should make sense because if you say this, you say it as 75 hundredths. The third step is to simplify, or sometimes we say reduce, the fraction. So you're looking for what do both the top and the bottom divide by. That gives us 3/4. And you want to make sure that it's divided completely so that there is nothing else that they have in common. So on this first one, we don't really need this 0. It doesn't make anything for my example. So I'm going to put 0.5 over 1. I've got one decimal place, so I need to multiply by 10. Which means I also need to multiply the bottom by 10. Now here's kind of a shortcut. There's one decimal place, there's 1 0. That will always be true. Both of these divide by 5, which makes this reduce to 1/2. So 2 decimal places, 2 zeros. And that should make sense. 64 hundredths. Now both of these are divisible by 2, which gives me 32 over 50, but they're also divisible by 2 again. So really, I could have divided by 4 initially, or you can do it in steps, whichever works for you. Just make sure that you reduce completely. Notice this one has a whole number in front, or an integer number in front. So -1 just hangs out front. I don't need to worry about converting that one. This is what I need to worry about. And as we talked about on our first example, this is 75 hundredths, which of course reduces to 3/4. Got a few more. So again, the whole number just stays a whole number. 581 gets written over 1,000. 3 decimal places, 3 zeros. And this one actually does not reduce. Those two numbers have nothing in common. The -6 is in front. The 9, 2 decimal places, 2 zeros. 9 hundredths does not reduce, so we leave it alone. 5, okay, now we have 3 decimal places, so 1, 2, 3. So that is 3 thousandths. Okay, so that's all we have for today. Here's another look at that chart that I was drawing for you earlier. Please begin the homework in the next few pages of your booklet.